The distress beacon pulsed weakly through the void, a dying heartbeat in the darkness of space. Margaret watched the holographic display flicker as another system failed aboard the research station Prometheus 7. Beside her, Paul checked the atmospheric readings for the third time in as many minutes. "Oxygen levels at 42%, he announced, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We've got maybe 18 hours before it becomes critical." Margaret nodded, her fingers dancing across the communications panel. The screen showed nothing but static and the harsh reality of their situation. 23 researchers from 6 different species stranded on a station spiraling toward the gravity well of a dying star. The evacuation ships had come and gone 3 days ago, taking everyone the Galactic Council deemed essential personnel. The humans hadn't made the cut. "Still no response from the Council?" asked Velkoth, one of the Centaurian researchers. His crystalline form refracted the emergency lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. "Nothing," Margaret replied. The last transmission said they'd calculated the rescue cost versus the station's research value. "We didn't meet the threshold." Paul laughed bitterly. "They left us because we're from Earth, a Class 12 death world. They think we're disposable." The other researchers shifted uncomfortably. It was true, even if nobody wanted to say it aloud. Humans were considered barely civilized, hailing from a planet so hostile that most species needed environmental suits just to visit. High gravity, extreme weather, aggressive fauna, diseases that evolved at breakneck speed. Earth was a nightmare world that somehow produced a species crazy enough to thrive there. "The structural integrity is failing in sections C through F," reported Zilnara, a Aquilian engineer whose breathing apparatus hissed with each word. "We should move everyone to Section A. It's the most stable." "No," Margaret said suddenly, straightening up. "We're not waiting to die." Paul turned to look at her, recognition dawning in his eyes. They'd worked together for 3 years, and he knew that expression. "You have a plan." "The station has 4 cargo pods still attached," she said, pulling up the schematics. "They're not designed for life support, but they're space-worthy." "Margaret, those pods are barely sealed," Velkoth protested. "There's no atmosphere control, no navigation systems." "But there are thrusters," Paul interrupted, catching on. "Manual ones, and we've got emergency pressure suits in storage." "You're talking about riding cargo pods through space?" Zilnara's voice rose in pitch. "That's insane!" Margaret smiled grimly. "Yeah, it's a human solution." The next 6 hours were chaos. While the station groaned and buckled around them, Margaret and Paul organized the impossible. They retrofitted the cargo pods with every spare oxygen tank they could find. Paul jury-rigged a basic navigation system using spare parts and a prayer. Margaret calculated trajectories by hand, accounting for the star's gravity, the station's degrading orbit, and the location of the nearest inhabited system. The other researchers watched in amazement as the 2 humans worked with a focused intensity that bordered on recklessness. They welded, rewired, and improvised solutions that violated every safety protocol in the Galactic Handbook. "This would never pass inspection," Velkoth observed. "Good thing the inspectors abandoned us to die," Paul shot back, not looking up from the control panel he was installing. When the pods were ready, if ready was even the right word, Margaret gathered everyone in the loading bay. 23 beings from across the galaxy, all of them facing death, all of them abandoned by the civilization they'd served. "This is going to be rough," she told them honestly. "The pods will be cold. We'll be in suits for 5 days minimum. The trajectory I've plotted gives us an 83% chance of reaching the Kepler station if everything goes right." "And if it doesn't?" someone asked. Paul shrugged. "Then we die trying. But that's better than dying waiting." They launched in waves, each pod firing away from the dying station with Margaret's calculations guiding them. She and Paul went last, making sure everyone else was away before sealing themselves into the final pod. As the station's hull groaned behind them, Paul hit the thruster control. The pod shot forward, pressing them against the bulkhead. Through the small viewport, they watched Prometheus 7 begin its final death spiral. The pod was freezing, barely pressurized, and shaking like it would tear apart at any moment. "Margaret," Paul said through the suitcom. "That 83% figure, I made it up," she admitted. "I have no idea if this will work." He laughed, the sound crackling through the radio. "Humanity, fuck yeah." The journey was exactly as terrible as Margaret had predicted. They drifted through the void, watching their oxygen levels drop, making microscopic course corrections with thrusters that threatened to fail with each firing. The cold seeped into their bones despite the suit's heating elements. Sleep came in brief, fitful intervals. On the fourth day, Kepler Station's sensors picked up the pods. When the rescue ships arrived, the crew couldn't believe what they found. 23 survivors in cargo pods that should have been tombs, guided by navigation so precise it seemed impossible, kept alive by sheer human stubbornness. The story spread through the Galactic Council like wildfire. The researchers they'd abandoned, the humans they'd written off as expendable, had done the impossible. In the medical bay, as Margaret and Paul recovered from hypothermia and oxygen deprivation, the Council's official apology arrived. Margaret deleted it without reading. "They'll come around," Paul said. "Humans are hard to kill." Margaret smiled. "And harder to forget." Outside, the stars burned bright and cold, indifferent to the drama of the species that crossed between them. But somewhere in that vast darkness, the lesson had been learned. Never abandon humans to die. They had a frustrating habit of surviving, and an even more frustrating habit of making sure everyone else survived, too. That was the thing about Deathworlders. They didn't know when to give up.